The morning sun rose slowly over Brookline, painting the manicured lawns of Chestnut Hill Avenue in pale gold. Mist curled along the edges of the long stone driveway leading up to the Whitfield estate, a sprawling federal-style mansion, with white columns, ivy-laced brick, and tall hedges trimmed so precisely they looked carved by hand. It was the kind of house that whispered old money. The kind of house where people did not raise their voices, where servants moved like ghosts, and where every breakfast plate had been set the same way for 20 years. It was also the kind of house where on this particular Tuesday morning in early October, a 10-year-old girl named Briar Holloway was about to save a man's life. Briar was small for her age, with chestnut hair pulled back in a loose braid that her father had attempted that morning, and eyes that were the color of wet bark after rain. She wore a faded blue jacket, 2 sizes too large, hand-me-down jeans, and rubber boots speckled with dirt from the rose beds. In her hand, she carried a small green watering can. She had been pretending to water the geraniums near the front gate for almost 20 minutes. She was not actually watering them. She was watching. The black sedan had arrived at 6:53. She knew because she had checked the small wristwatch her father had given her last Christmas, the one with the cracked face and the leather strap that was too big for her wrist. The car had pulled up exactly 7 minutes earlier than Mr. Whitfield's regular driver, a man named Howard, ever did. That was the first thing wrong. The second thing wrong was the driver himself. He was tall, broader in the shoulders than Howard. His suit was a shade too dark, and his shoes were brand new, the soles unscuffed. Briar noticed shoes. Her mother had taught her to notice shoes. You can tell a great deal about a man, her mother once said, kneeling in the herb garden, dirt streaked across her cheek by what he chooses to walk in. That had been 3 years ago. Briar still remembered the smell of basil on her mother's hands. The third thing wrong was the most important. When the driver had gotten out to wait by the car, he had checked his watch with his left hand, then opened the rear passenger door with his left hand. He kept the keys in his right pocket. Howard always opened the door with his right hand, always. He was right-handed. Briar had watched him do it 5 mornings a week for the past 5 years. He kept his keys in his left pocket because that was where his mother had taught him to keep them when he was a boy in South Boston, and he had told Briar that story once when he gave her a butterscotch candy from the glove box. This man was not Howard. The fourth thing wrong was the license plate. Mr. Whitfield's company car ended in 387. Briar knew this because she had once seen Howard write it on a delivery slip, and numbers stayed in her head the way songs stayed in other people's. This plate ended in 381. A single digit changed, a single digit that no one would ever notice. Not a man in a hurry, not a man checking emails, not a man who climbed into the back of his own car every morning the way other men climbed into their own beds. The fifth thing wrong was the company logo on the rear door panel. The logo of Beacon Executive Transport was a stylized lighthouse with a navy blue ring around it. The ring on this door was faded almost gray, as if someone had printed it quickly and not quite right. Briar lowered the watering can to her side. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. Her father had taught her that. When something is wrong, he had said, your heart can run, but your hands must not. Hollis Holloway had been a Marine before he had been a gardener. He did not talk much about the years before her mother, but he had taught Briar how to hold still when stillness mattered. This was a moment when stillness mattered. The front door of the house opened. Sterling Whitfield stepped out into the morning light. He was 50 years old, tall, lean in the way men become lean when they replace meals with meetings. His hair was the color of pewter, swept back from a face that had once been handsome and was now simply expensive. He wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored in London, a navy tie his wife had picked out the night before, and a silver wristwatch that he glanced at without really seeing. In one hand, he held a leather briefcase. In the other, his phone. He was already half inside another world. He did not look at the driver. He did not look at the car. He was walking toward the vehicle the way he walked toward every car, every elevator, every doorway, with purpose, with speed, with the certainty of a man who had not been told no in 15 years. Briar set the watering can down on the gravel path. She crossed the driveway in 7 quick steps. She was small enough that for a moment neither the driver nor Sterling saw her. Then Sterling glanced down mid-stride and stopped. "Mr. Whitfield." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. He blinked at her. There was a flicker of confusion on his face, the kind of confusion adults have when a child interrupts something important. "Briar, honey, I'm in a hurry. Is your father around?" She did not answer that question. Instead, she reached up and took his hand. Her fingers were cold. His were warm. His ring, the heavy gold band his wife had slid onto his finger 15 years ago in a chapel on Beacon Hill, pressed against her palm. "Stay quiet," she said. "Follow me." He stared at her. For a man who had built a $500 million firm by trusting his instincts, who had walked away from deals on the strength of a single misplaced word, who had once told a board of directors that the only currency that never inflated was attention, he should have understood instantly. But he did not, because she was a child, because his car was waiting, because he was late. "Briar, what are you doing? I need to go." "Please." Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. "Please, sir, just come with me. Don't let them see you." "See me who?" She was already pulling. She tugged him gently but firmly off the stone walkway and toward the side of the driveway where a row of large terracotta planters stood between the gravel and the boxwood hedge. The planters were tall, almost as tall as she was, full of late-blooming chrysanthemums in deep autumn red. She crouched behind them and tugged his sleeve. "Please stay low." For one long second, Sterling Whitfield stood frozen on the gravel. The driver 20 feet away had turned his head toward the sound. He had not yet seen them, partially blocked by the curve of the driveway and the early shadows of the elm trees. Sterling looked at the car. He looked at the small girl crouched behind the chrysanthemums holding his sleeve, with the kind of grip a child only uses when something is more important than embarrassment. And for reasons he could not explain even to himself, even years later, when he told this story in courtrooms and over quiet dinners with men he trusted, he crouched. His tailored suit brushed the gravel. The knee of his pants picked up a smear of garden dust. His briefcase tilted against the planter. "Why are we hiding?" he whispered. She did not answer right away. She was watching the gate. From their hiding place, they could see the car clearly. The driver was standing by the open rear door, glancing toward the house. He pulled out a phone and lifted it to his ear, speaking quickly. Briar pointed without lifting her hand high. "That's not your driver." Sterling frowned. "Of course it is. That's Beacon. They've driven me for 8 years. That's not Howard. It might be a substitute. Howard's been sick this week." "Howard wasn't sick yesterday. I saw him." Her voice was small but certain. "He brought me a butterscotch." Sterling looked at her. "Howard always opens the door with his right hand," she said. "He keeps his keys in his left pocket. That man opened it with his left hand, and the license plate ends in 381. Yours ends in 387. A breath went out of Sterling's chest that he did not realize he had been holding. He looked again more carefully, this time at the car. The vehicle looked the same. Same model, same color, same dark-tinted rear windows. He had ridden in that car, or one exactly like it, hundreds of times. He had read contracts in the back seat. He had rehearsed speeches. He had more than once fallen asleep with his head against the window after long flights. He had never in all those years looked at the license plate. Why would he? It was his car. "They said this would happen," Briar whispered. Sterling turned his head toward her. "Who said?" She swallowed. "Yesterday afternoon, I was in the back garden behind the greenhouse. I was watching my dad pull up the dahlias. I heard them talking inside the glass." "Who?" Briar, Mrs. Whitfield, and a man. Sterling went still. The morning light was thin and clean. Somewhere over the hedge a cardinal called. The wind turned a single yellow leaf along the gravel path. He did not move. "What man?" "I don't know his name," she said. "But he's been here before. 3 times. He came in a green car. He told the front gate he was a landscape architect. Mrs. Whitfield said he was helping her plan the new pavilion. Sterling's mind moved slowly as if through water. There had been talk of a pavilion a few months back. Adelaide had mentioned it at dinner casually between sips of wine. A small folly in the rose garden, she had said. Something charming. Something for the spring auction photographs. He had nodded and gone back to his email. They said the driver would be different today, Breyer continued. They said you wouldn't notice because you're always in a hurry. They said the car would not go to the airport. They said it would go somewhere else, somewhere quiet. The cardinal called again. They said he would be paid in cash. They said you would be kept somewhere small. They said no food. They said not too long, just long enough for you to be too weak to fight or run. Sterling's hand, the one holding the briefcase, had gone numb. They said when enough time had passed, the insurance would pay $25 million, and it would all go to her. He closed his eyes. He felt the gravel under his knee. He felt the cool morning air against his neck. He felt the small, steady weight of a child's hand on his sleeve. $25 million. The number landed in him like a stone dropped into still water. It was not the number that hurt. It was the precision of it. A round number, a planned number, a number someone had calculated with care. His phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down. The screen said one word, Adelaide. He stared at it. For a moment, he could not feel his fingers. Then slowly, with the calmness of a man who had just been told that his oldest friend had died, he lifted the phone to his ear. Yes. Adelaide's voice came through warm and bright, the way it always sounded in the morning. Sterling, sweetheart, where are you? The driver just called the house. He said you haven't come out yet. You're going to be late for the airport. He looked across the planter. He looked at the man by the car, who was indeed holding a phone to his ear. I'm coming, he said. I'm just looking for a file. Oh, baby, leave it. You can have Prescott send it to your hotel. It's fine, I've got it. Hurry, you can't miss this flight. We've talked about Chicago for weeks. I know. There was a pause, just a small one. I love you, she said. Travel safe. He did not answer. He hung up the phone. He sat very still behind the chrysanthemums with one knee on the gravel and his hand on his briefcase, and a 10-year-old girl beside him who was not crying, who was not shaking, who was just watching the gate with the steady, patient eyes of a child who had been raised by a man who had come back from places he never spoke of. After a long moment, Sterling cleared his throat. Breyer. Yes, sir. You said you heard them talking inside the greenhouse. Yes, sir. And you understood what they were saying. Most of it. Did anyone else hear? No. Did you tell your father? She hesitated. No, sir. Why not? Because if I was wrong, my dad could lose his job. And if I was right, I thought maybe the wrong people would hear before you did. The cardinal called a third time. The yellow leaf finished its slow turn along the gravel and came to rest against the planter. Sterling Whitfield, who had built one of the most respected investment firms in New England, who had been on the cover of Boston Magazine, who had received an honorary doctorate from Northeastern, only the previous spring stared at the small girl in the oversized blue jacket and tried to remember the last time anyone in his life had told him something difficult without first calculating what they wanted from him. He could not remember. Breyer, he said quietly. Yes, sir. Did you record any of it? She nodded. She reached into the front pocket of her jacket and pulled out a phone. It was old. The screen scratched the case bright orange with a chip in one corner. It belonged to her father. I knew you wouldn't believe me, she said. I'm just a kid. He looked at the phone. He did not take it yet. Tell me one thing first. Yes, sir. The man, the one in the green car. Yes, sir. What did he look like? She thought for a long moment. Tall, she said. Not as tall as you. Brown hair. There's a small line on his chin like he cut it shaving once and it didn't heal right. He has very white teeth. He smiles a lot, but not with his eyes. And he has a watch with a brown leather strap that he plays with when he's nervous. She paused. and his voice is soft, she said, like he's always trying to sound kind. Sterling closed his eyes briefly. He did not know why he closed them. Perhaps because somewhere deep in the back of his mind a name had begun to surface, and he wanted one last second of not being certain. He opened them. "Briar," he said, "I want you to play the recording for me now, but quietly. Hold it close." She nodded. She slid the phone toward him. He cupped his hand around it, and they leaned their heads close together behind the chrysanthemums, two unlikely conspirators in a garden that had until that morning been one of the most peaceful places he owned. She pressed play. There was wind first. Wind through leaves, the soft creak of the greenhouse door swinging on its old hinges, and then footsteps on the brick floor inside. Then a woman's voice, his wife's voice. Once he gets in the car, it's done. He did not breathe. He won't be at the airport. By the time anyone realizes something's wrong, he'll be off the grid. We just have to make sure the driver stays calm. A man's voice answered, soft, careful, patient. Carl knows what he's doing. He needs the money, and he's not greedy enough to ask questions. He'll take Sterling to the property in Saugus. Old textile warehouse, private owner, no cameras, no neighbors. He stays there. No phone, no wallet, no food. We let nature do the work. How long? Long enough that when they find him, no one can prove anything. A man like Sterling has enemies. Investors he's burned. Competitors. The story writes itself. Adelaide's voice grew quieter. And the insurance. You're the primary beneficiary. 25 million when he's declared. Could take a while, but the policy doesn't have a vanishing clause. Your lawyer will earn his fee, but it'll come. Silence. Then Adelaide again. I gave him 15 years. Sterling felt his own hand tighten around the small phone. 15 years, she said, of dinners alone, of being told that next year would be different, of watching him talk to his Bloomberg terminal more than he talked to me. If I leave with nothing. Half of nothing after his lawyers are done. I'm not leaving with nothing. You won't have to, the man said. And then we go where we should have gone 25 years ago. A pause. Then Adelaide laughed soft and tired. Don't make this about us, Reed. Make it about the money. The recording cut off. Sterling did not move. The cardinal had stopped calling. The world was quiet. Briar watched him. She did not say anything. She had watched her father grieve once in the months after her mother died, and she had learned that some silences should not be interrupted. After a long time, Sterling spoke. His voice was different, lower, older, like it belonged to a man at the end of a long winter. Reed. Yes, sir, she said softly. She called him Reed. He nodded slowly. 3 times he came, he said, while I was traveling. Yes, sir. Always when I was gone. Yes, sir. And you saw him. Yes, sir. Once when I was helping my dad with the leaf bags. He drove right past us. He looked at me. He smiled at me. She paused, but not with his eyes. Sterling looked across the chrysanthemums. The driver was still by the car, glancing now and then toward the house. He had begun to look impatient. He took a few steps toward the front walkway, then stopped, as if unsure whether to come closer or wait. Sterling's phone buzzed again. Adelaide. He did not answer. He let it ring. When it stopped, he lifted his phone, opened a new message, and typed slowly. Just walk back inside. Forgot something. Be there in 20. He hit send. Then he turned to Briar. Stand up slowly, he said. Walk with me back to the house. Don't look at the car. Don't look at the gate. Look at me. Talk to me about your watering can, like nothing is wrong. She nodded. They stood up together. He picked up his briefcase. She picked up the watering can. He kept his hand on her shoulder, light and casual, the way a man in a hurry might absent-mindedly steer a child out of his path. They walked across the gravel. The driver, watching from the car, saw an executive in a charcoal suit being slightly delayed by the gardener's daughter. He saw a small girl holding a green watering can, her chestnut braid catching the morning light. He saw an annoyed-looking employer pat her shoulder and walk back toward the front door. He did not see anything else. He could not have seen anything else. The front door closed behind them with the soft, expensive click of a perfectly balanced hinge. Inside the house was silent. Adelaide was in the back parlor, a delicate room she used for her morning calls. The grandfather clock in the foyer ticked steadily, marking out a rhythm that had not changed in 20 years. Sterling turned to Briar. "Where is your father right now?" "In the rose garden. He's pruning the canes." "Good. I want you to walk back to him. Slowly. Do not run. Do not look upset. Do not say a word about this to him yet. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "I'll come find you in an hour, maybe less. Yes, Yes, sir." She turned to leave. Then she stopped. "Mr. Whitfield." "Yeah, I'm not lying." He looked down at her. For a moment he saw not a child in an oversized jacket, but the only honest person who had stood in his entryway in many years. "I know," he said. She nodded once and walked out the side door toward the garden. Sterling Whitfield stood alone in his foyer for a long moment. Then he walked very calmly into his study and closed the door behind him. He did not sit down. He walked to the safe behind the painting of the Boston Light, a small Whistler print Adelaide had bought him for their 10th anniversary. He pressed his thumb to the biometric lock. The safe opened with a quiet hiss. Inside, beneath the deeds to 2 properties and a small stack of bearer bonds his grandfather had left him, there was a manila envelope. He took it out. He sat down at his desk and opened it slowly. The top page was a life insurance policy. The original, issued 9 years ago, $5 million, beneficiary his wife. Term standard. Beneath it was an amendment. He had never seen the amendment before. The amendment was dated 6 months ago. It increased the policy to $25 million. It contained an updated medical waiver signed by his physician. It contained an updated risk disclosure initialed in 3 places. And at the bottom of the last page was his signature. Sterling stared at it. It was his signature. It curved the way his signature curved. It slanted the way his signature slanted. The S at the beginning had the same quick loop. The W in Whitfield had the same long downstroke, but he did not remember signing it. He could not remember it because he had not signed it. He was certain of that. He was certain of it the way a man is certain of his own name. 6 months ago, he had been in Chicago for the Greshman acquisition. He had signed perhaps 400 documents in the span of 3 days in 3 different hotel rooms, while taking calls and eating cold sandwiches and sleeping 4 hours a night. His office had sent him stacks every morning. His assistant had flagged the signature lines. He had signed without reading. He had always signed without reading. That was the system. That was how it had always worked, and someone had used it. He set the document down on the desk. His hands were not shaking, but they were cold. He picked up his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he had not called in nearly a year. Prescott Vaughn, his attorney, old friend, Harvard Law class of '78, godfather to the son Sterling had always meant to have and never had. The kind of man who answered his phone on the second ring even when he was supposed to be on vacation. Sterling pressed call. Prescott picked up on the second ring. "Sterling, you're supposed to be over Lake Erie." Prescott. There was a small pause. Prescott Vaughn had known Sterling Whitfield for 30 years. He had heard Sterling angry. He had heard Sterling exhausted. He had once heard Sterling laughing so hard at a Red Sox game that he could barely breathe. He had never heard Sterling sound like this. "Talk to me," Prescott said. "I need you to come to the house, through the back, park on Reservoir Road and walk in. Do not call ahead. Do not tell anyone." "Sterling, what's happened?" "I think someone is trying to make me disappear." There was a longer pause. "I'm 40 minutes out." Make it 30. Sterling. Yes. Are you safe in the house right now? Sterling looked at the closed door of his study. He listened to the soft hum of the house around him, the distant murmur of Adelaide's voice on the phone in the parlor, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, the quiet sound somewhere outside of his gardener pruning rose canes. For now, he said, I think so. Don't be alone with her until I get there. I know. And Sterling. Yes. Whatever it is, we will fix it. Sterling did not answer. He set the phone down on the desk beside the forged amendment with his own forged hand. He looked at the painting of the Boston light on the wall above the safe. It was a small lighthouse alone in a wide, empty harbor, throwing a thin beam of light into a gray fog. He had hung it there because he liked the idea of a small light in a great darkness. He had not until this morning ever felt like the man in the fog. Outside, beyond the leaded glass of the study window, he could see a corner of the back garden. He could see Hollis Holloway, the gardener, moving methodically along the rose canes, his shears flashing once in the early sun. He could see Briar standing a few feet away from her father, the green watering can on the ground beside her. She was not pretending to water anything anymore. She was simply standing in the garden, watching the house with the patient, unblinking attention of a child who had decided that the most important thing in her 10-year-old life was to keep an eye on a man named Sterling Whitfield. Sterling stood up. He walked to the window. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass. In a house full of paintings and silver and tailored suits and forged signatures, the only thing that felt true to him in that moment was a 10-year-old girl in an oversized blue jacket standing very still in his garden. He whispered her name to the glass, Briar. He did not know yet that she had recorded his wife 3 times. He did not know yet that the man named Reed had been watching the house for far longer than he could imagine. He did not know yet that the woman who had stood beside him at his mother's funeral, who had held his hand through 3 IPOs and 4 recessions, who had laughed at his terrible jokes for 15 years, was at that very moment in the back parlor, checking a small encrypted message on a phone he had never seen, smiling faintly at a screen that read only, "He's running late, but the car is ready." He did not know any of that yet, but he had begun to suspect. And by the end of the day, suspicion would not be enough. By the end of the day, he would understand that the most dangerous thing in his life was not a stranger with a gun, or a competitor with a lawsuit, or an investor with a grudge. The most dangerous thing in his life was a routine, a schedule, a car at 6:53 in the morning, a wife who knew exactly when he would walk out the front door. And the only reason he was going to live long enough to understand any of it was a 10-year-old girl who had noticed that a man had opened a car door with the wrong hand. He pulled his hand back from the glass. He walked to his desk. He sat down. And for the first time in many years, Sterling Whitfield, age 50, CEO of Whitfield Industries, husband, employer, philanthropist, took out a clean yellow legal pad, uncapped a pen, and wrote in careful letters at the top of the page 3 words: "Who knows everything?" Beneath it, slowly, he began to make a list. Outside in the garden, Briar Holloway crouched beside her father, picked up a fallen rose petal, and turned it slowly in her small, dirt-smudged fingers. She did not know yet that she had just become the most important witness in a case that would in a few months' time fill 3 filing cabinets in a Boston federal courtroom. She only knew that somewhere inside that big white house, a man she had decided to trust was finally listening. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Prescott Vaughn arrived at the back gate of the Whitfield estate at exactly 7:41 that morning. He came on foot in a gray overcoat carrying a leather satchel that had been to more closed-door negotiations than most lawyers saw in a lifetime. He did not ring the front bell. He did not announce himself to the house staff. He walked along the side path that led past the greenhouse, past the rose garden, where Hollis Holloway was still pruning canes, and around to the small service entrance near the kitchen. Sterling let him in himself. They did not embrace. Prescott looked at his old friend for a long moment, took in the set of his jaw, the stillness of his hands, the faint smear of gravel dust on the knee of his suit pants, and simply nodded. "Where is she?" Prescott asked quietly. "Back parlor, on her morning calls. She thinks I'm rebooking my flight." "Good. Keep her thinking that. Where can we work?" "My study." They walked together through the back hall, past the silent dining room, and the closed door of the library, and into Sterling's study. Sterling locked the door behind them. Prescott set the satchel on the desk and without preamble opened it. "Talk." Sterling told him everything. He told him about Breyer at the Chrysanthemums, about the wrong hand on the wrong door, about the license plate, about the recording in the greenhouse, about Adelaide's voice saying 15 years, about the man named Reed, about the warehouse in Saugus, about the $25 million policy with his own signature on it that he had never signed. He told it the way a man gives a deposition, cleanly, in order, without embellishment. When he finished, Prescott did not speak for a long moment. He stood with his hands flat on the desk, looking down at the forged amendment Sterling had taken from the safe. He turned the pages slowly. He examined the signature on the last page under the small brass desk lamp. He tilted it toward the light. "It's good," he said finally. "It's very good, but the slant of the W is wrong by maybe 2 degrees, and the pressure on the third initial is too even. Whoever did this had time and they had samples, but they didn't have your hand. Adelaide has had access to 15 years of my signed documents." "Yes, she has." Prescott set the amendment down. He looked at Sterling. "Before we go any further, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer it the way you would answer me in a courtroom." "Go ahead." "Is there any chance at all, that the child made this up? That she heard fragments of something and built a story? That she dislikes Mrs. Whitfield? That her father has a grievance? That she wants attention? That the recording could be edited, mistaken, or staged?" Sterling did not answer right away. He thought about Breyer's hand on his sleeve, the steadiness of her voice, the way she had described the man's chin, his teeth, his soft voice that did not match his eyes. The way she had said, "I'm not lying," with no insistence in it, only the quiet, tired honesty of a child who already knew that adults often did not believe children. "No," Sterling said. "Not a chance." Prescott nodded once. "Then we proceed as if every word she said is true." He sat down in the chair across from Sterling's desk. He took a fountain pen from his coat pocket. He uncapped it. "We have 3 priorities," he said. "First, we keep you alive. Second, we keep that child and her father safe. Third, we build a case so airtight that when this comes apart, no one walks into a courtroom and tells a sympathetic story about a confused, lonely housewife and a misunderstanding." "Agreed." "Then I need you to do 3 things today. You will not go to Chicago. You will not get into any car you have not personally inspected. And you will not, under any circumstance, be alone with your wife in a private space until further notice. Public spaces, the dining room, the front hall, fine. The bedroom, the back terrace, the car, no." "Understood. Now, tell me about your routines, all of them." For the next 40 minutes, Sterling Whitfield walked his attorney through his life, his travel schedule, his drivers, his office staff, his house staff, the names of everyone who had ever held a copy of his daily calendar, his banker, his accountant, his housekeeper, his personal assistant, his longtime executive assistant in the Boston office, his nutritionist, the small handful of people who knew the codes to the house alarm, the names of the gate guards. He worked through it slowly, and as he did, Prescott took careful, neat notes in a leather notebook. Now and then, Prescott asked a single quiet question. "How long? Who recommended them? How are they paid? Have you ever questioned them?" When they reached the name Imogen Fairbank, Sterling paused. "She has been with the family for 20 years, he said. "She was my mother's housekeeper before mine. She runs the house. She runs everything in the house." Beyond reproach, Sterling thought of Imogen's quiet, watchful eyes. The way she had asked him the day before if everything was all right. The way she had stood in the doorway of his office for a half-second longer than she needed to. I would have said yes yesterday. Today, today I'm not sure. Prescott wrote a small notation beside her name. And the gardener. Hollis, 5 years, Marine. Wife died of cancer a couple years ago. Daughter is the one who came to me. He keeps to himself, honest man. The kind of man who would tell you to your face if he thought you were wrong. Good. Prescott turned the page. Now, tell me about Mrs. Whitfield's day. Right now, from the moment she wakes up. Sterling described her routine. The early phone calls, the personal trainer at 8, the drive into the city for board meetings or charity functions. The lunches often with women whose names he knew, but whose faces he could no longer fully picture. The afternoons that had become harder to account for in the past year. The evenings she had increasingly spent at events without him. How often does she travel? Once a month, sometimes more. Charity work, visiting her sister in Newport, spa weekends with friends. And in the past year, how often have you traveled the same weekend she did? Sterling stopped. He thought. Almost never, he said quietly. So she has been alone away from this house with no one watching her schedule regularly. Yes. Prescott made another note. All right, here is what is going to happen. I'm going to leave you for an hour. I'm going to make some calls. By the time I come back, I'll have a private investigator on a flight from New York and a forensic document examiner who can come up from Hartford. We'll need bank records, phone records, and anything we can find on this Reed. You said the child described him in detail. Yes, tall, brown hair, small scar on his chin, brown leather watch, soft voice, smiles without his eyes. That's a face the investigator can work with. There aren't that many men who fit that description who have been in and out of this property in the past 6 months in a green car. We will find him. Prescott. Yes. I want him alive. I want him in a courtroom. I want her in a courtroom. That is the plan. Don't let this become a story about a husband who took matters into his own hands. It won't. I won't let it. Prescott stood. He closed his notebook. He paused at the door. Sterling. Yes. You are about to spend several days inside this house pretending that nothing has changed. Pretending you do not know what you know. Sitting across from her at dinner. Wishing her good night. Hearing her laugh at something on the television. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. Harder than any deal. Harder than any board fight. I want you to understand that now. I understand. You will want to confront her. You will want to ask her why. You will want to see her face when she realizes you know. Do not yet. The instinct to confront is the instinct to be told you are still loved. You will not be told that. You will be told a story. And that story will be designed to make you doubt the only honest person in this house. Sterling met his eyes. The only honest patient in this house, he said, is the gardener's daughter. I know, Prescott said, and we are going to keep her that way. He let himself out the side door. Sterling stood alone in the study for a long moment. Then he went to find Briar. He found her in the kitchen barn behind the greenhouse, kneeling beside her father, helping him tie back a leaning tomato vine. The morning had warmed slightly. Hollis was working in shirt sleeves, the cuffs rolled to the elbow, his forearms tanned and scarred from years of work. He looked up when Sterling approached. Mr. Whitfield? Hollis, could I borrow Briar for a few minutes? Hollis glanced at his daughter. Briar nodded once as if there had been a question between them already. Of course, sir. Sterling and Briar walked together toward the greenhouse. The glass walls caught the late morning light, turning the inside into a soft green chamber where rosemary and basil and small fig trees grew in clay pots on long wooden tables. Sterling closed the greenhouse door behind them. He spoke quietly. Briar, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, even if you think the answer might worry me. Yes, sir. You said yesterday was the first time you heard them clearly. Yes, sir. Was it the first time you heard anything at all? She was silent for a moment. She set her small hands flat on the wooden table beside a pot of mint. She looked at him steadily. No, sir. He waited. The first time was about a month ago, she said. I was in the side yard near the hydrangeas. The window of her parlor was open. She was on the phone. She didn't say a name, but she said we have to wait until the paperwork is finished. And she laughed in a way that wasn't really laughing. Go on. The second time was 3 weeks ago. I was bringing my dad his thermos. I was walking by the garage. She was talking to someone in a car. I couldn't see his face, just his hand on the steering wheel. Brown leather watch. She said you make sure Carl is not greedy. He has to stay scared and stay quiet. Carl. Yes, sir. The name sat in the warm green air between them. And the third time. The third time was 9 days ago, inside the greenhouse. Just like yesterday. He was here. They were standing right there. She pointed to the back corner near the small potting bench. He said we will not get another chance like this. The next trip he takes alone. She said he goes to Chicago in 2 weeks. She said we will be ready. Sterling stood very still. Briar. Yes, sir. Why didn't you tell anyone the first 2 times? Because the first time I thought maybe I misunderstood. I'm only 10. Sometimes grown-ups say things and I don't catch all of it. And the second time I started to think I should tell someone, but I didn't know who. My dad would have made us leave. And I didn't want to leave my dad without a job. She paused. He's still sad about my mom. Working makes him better. Sterling closed his eyes for a moment. And the third time. The third time I went home and I took my dad's old phone, the one he doesn't use anymore. He keeps it in the kitchen drawer because it has pictures of my mom on it. I charged it. I learned how to use the recorder. And then yesterday I waited. You waited. Yes, sir. I sat by the rosemary all afternoon. I pretended to read a book. When I heard them coming, I started the recorder and I put the phone on the inside of the planter under the basil. Then I left and came back later for the phone. Sterling looked at her for a long, long moment. He had built a $500 million firm. He had negotiated against men who flew in from Geneva and Hong Kong with teams of advisors. He had outmaneuvered hostile boards. He had stared down 2 federal regulators in the same week. He had in his 50 years on Earth been called many things. Sharp, ruthless, brilliant, cold. He had never until this moment been schooled in patience by a 10-year-old. Briar. Yes, sir. Where's the phone now? In a wooden box under my bed. The box is locked. I have the key on a string around my neck. How many recordings? 3. The first one is short. The second one is short. The third one is the long one I played for you. Are there copies? She hesitated. I made 1 copy of each on a memory card. I hid the memory card inside a hollow place behind a brick in the greenhouse wall. There, behind that brick, with the chip in the corner. He looked. There was a brick with a chip in the corner. He almost laughed. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of a man who has just realized that the most professional security operation in his entire life had been run by a child with a hairband and a watering can. Briar. Yes, sir. From this moment on, I want you to keep doing what you are doing. Keep noticing. Keep listening. Do not tell anyone. Not your father. Not yet. I will tell him myself today with a man I trust. Until then, you stay close to him. You do not go anywhere on this property alone. Yes, sir. And one more thing. Yes, sir. You said the man came in a green car 3 times. Yes, sir. Did you ever see the license plate? She reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. He unfolded it. In neat block letters in pencil was a Massachusetts plate number. Beneath it in slightly smaller letters were the words Green Audi a sixth dent on the rear right bumper like someone backed into a pole. He looked up. You wrote this down. Yes, sir. All three times, Signs. Yes, sir, just to make sure. Briar. Yes, sir. You are going to be a remarkable woman someday. She thought about that seriously the way she thought about everything. My mom said that too, she said quietly. She said women who pay attention are the ones who change things. Sterling could not answer that for a moment. He simply nodded. Your mother was right, he said. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his inside breast pocket. That afternoon, Sterling Whitfield did three things. He called his Chicago counterpart and rebooked the meeting for the following month, citing a sudden family matter. The man on the other end, an old colleague, did not press. Adult men understood the phrase family matter the way priests understood confession. It explained everything and required no detail. He met Prescott in the back garden, where they walked slowly along the boxwood hedge, while Prescott told him in a low voice what his investigators had already begun to find. There was a man named Reed Calloway, real estate broker, Boston and the Cape, two failed development projects, substantial personal debt, a history of failed relationships with wealthy women, and more interestingly, a passing mention in a closed Connecticut investigation a decade earlier. The wife of a Hartford industrialist. Her death had been ruled an accident. The investigators had liked Calloway for it. They had not been able to prove anything. He had moved his work to Massachusetts shortly after. Sterling walked beside Prescott in silence for a long minute. Adelaide does not know that, he said finally. Almost certainly not. She thinks she's the architect. She is to a point. She is the one with the access, the schedule, the signatures. He brought the plan. He is the one who knew how this kind of thing has to be done. So we have a man who has done this before and a woman who thinks she found the great love of her life sitting at my dinner table tonight. Yes. Sterling stopped walking. He looked at the greenhouse 50 yards away, where Briar was sweeping the brick floor with a small broom her father had cut down to her size. I want him for what he tried to do to me, Sterling said. But I also want him for whatever he did in Hartford. I want every family that man hurt to get an answer. That is going to take time. I have time. Do you? Sterling did not answer. The third thing Sterling did that afternoon was sit down at the small mahogany writing desk in his study, take out a fresh yellow legal pad, and write a single page of notes in clear, careful handwriting that he then sealed in an envelope and locked in his safe. The envelope was addressed simply in case of my disappearance to Prescott Vaughn by name and home address. Inside the page said, if I am missing for more than 12 hours, do not believe any explanation given by my wife Adelaide Whitfield. Investigate Carl the substitute driver. Investigate Reed Calloway. Investigate Imogen Fairbank. Protect Briar Holloway and her father Hollis. Without the child, I would already be dead. Then he signed it with his own hand. The signature on that page was true. The signature on that page was... That evening, Sterling came down for dinner at 7:15, as he always did when he was home. The dining room was set for two, long candles in silver holders, white linen, a small arrangement of late roses from the garden cut by Hollis that morning before any of this had begun. The roses were a deep, blood-warm red. Adelaide came in a moment later. She was wearing a soft cream wool dress. Her hair, which had been pinned up in the afternoon, was now down. Her perfume was the one she always wore in the evenings, a quiet, expensive scent that smelled faintly of bergamot and old paper. You're home, she said. She kissed his cheek lightly. I rebooked Chicago, he said. I gathered. She sat across from him. Imogen Fairbank glided in silently with the first course, a small dish of roasted squash soup, and glided out again. Sterling watched the older woman as she went. He watched the slight, careful set of her shoulders. He watched the way she would not quite meet his eye. He filed it away. How was your day? Adelaide asked. Long, yours. Calls, boring ones. The Sinclair dinner is next week. I told them you would speak. I'll prepare something. You always do. She smiled at him over the rim of her wine glass. For one strange, suspended moment, he looked at the woman he had married. 15 years. He saw her at 29 in a yellow dress, laughing at something he had said in a small restaurant on Newbury Street. He saw her at 33, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed after his appendix had ruptured during a flight back from London. He saw her at 37, holding his hand at his mother's grave. He saw her at 40, raising a glass in the same dining room to celebrate the founding of his firm. He saw her at 45, smiling at him over a wine glass while she waited for him to disappear. Sterling, yes, you're staring. Am I? You are. He gave her a small, tired smile. I was thinking about time. That's a strange thing to think about over soup. Was it? She tilted her head slightly. Are you all right? I'm fine. A long day. Hmm. She watched him for a moment longer, then turned to her soup. The dinner went on. They spoke about the Sinclairs, about a fundraising gala, about a roof leak in the carriage house that needed to be addressed, about whether or not to send flowers to a board member who had lost her father. They spoke the way they had spoken across this same table for 15 years. Sterling answered everything. He laughed twice. He poured her a second glass of wine. Inside, behind the calm of his face, he was making lists. He was listing every meal he had eaten with her in the past 6 months. He was listing every gift she had given him, every charity event, every weekend away, every kiss on the cheek that had perhaps been a fraction less warm than the one before. He was listing the small, almost invisible erosions of a marriage. Erosions he had not bothered to notice when he had been busy building things he had thought would matter more. After dinner, Adelaide leaned across the table, took his hand, and squeezed it lightly. I'm glad you stayed, she said. He looked at her. So am I, he said. She smiled. I'm going to bed early. The trainer is coming at 6. Sleep well? You too, my love. She stood up. She walked around the table. She bent and kissed him on the temple, lightly, briefly, the way she always did. He felt the warmth of her cheek, the soft brush of her hair against his. He felt her hand rest for just a second on his shoulder. Try not to work too late, she said. I won't. She walked out of the dining room. He sat alone for a long time. After a while, Imogen came in to clear the plates. She moved quietly, efficiently, as she had done in this house since before Sterling had owned it. He watched her hands, plain hands, lined, veined, careful. Imogen. Yes, sir. How is your brother? Her hands paused almost imperceptibly on the edge of a soup dish. He's not well, sir. The doctors are doing what they can. I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you, sir. If there is ever anything the family can do, you only have to ask. She did not look at him. You have always been very kind, sir. I mean it. Yes, sir, I know. She lifted the plates. She walked back toward the kitchen. At the doorway, she paused for half a second, as if she might turn and say something. She did not. She stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the back hall. Sterling sat in the dining room alone in candlelight for a long time. He thought about Breyer's small hand on his sleeve. He thought about a forged signature on an insurance policy. He thought about a green Audi A6 with a dent in the rear right bumper. He thought about a wife who had kissed his temple and wished him good night and gone upstairs to a bedroom they had once shared in a way that now felt very far away. He thought about the word 15 years. He did not feel anger, not yet. Anger would come later in waves and private moments in the middle of the night when he could not sleep. What he felt instead, sitting alone in candlelight in a dining room he had paid for with 20 years of his life, was something stranger, something he could not name immediately. It felt like grief. It felt like the slow understanding that the woman he had loved was not perhaps the woman who had been sitting across from him. That woman had been a performance. The real woman was upstairs. The real woman was checking her phone. The real woman was waiting. Sometime after midnight, Sterling rose, blew out the candles, and walked through the dark house. He passed the foyer where the grandfather clock ticked. He passed the parlor where Adelaide took her morning calls. He passed the long hall where photographs of their life together hung in silver frames. He stopped at one of them, a photograph from their first anniversary. They were standing in front of the Boston Public Library, both of them young, both of them laughing. He had loved that photograph. He still loved it in some compartment of his heart he had not yet examined too closely. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he kept walking. He went into his study. He locked the door. He sat down at his desk. He turned on the small green-shaded lamp. On the desk was Breyer's small folded piece of paper with the green Audi's plate number. Beside it was the original $5 million life insurance policy with the forged $25 million amendment clipped to the back. Beside that was Prescott's leather satchel, which he had left for the night. Sterling pulled the satchel toward him. He opened it. Inside was a single yellow file folder, on the front of which Prescott had written in pencil 2 words, Project Lighthouse. Sterling looked at the words for a long moment. Then he opened the folder and began page by page to read what his attorney had already gathered. He did not stop until the first gray light of dawn began to come through the leaded glass of the study window. By then, Sterling Whitfield had a list of things to do. The list was very short. The list was very clear. It was the kind of list a man writes when he has stopped being surprised and started being patient. He folded the list and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He stood up, stretched, and walked to the window. Outside in the early morning gray, he could see 2 small figures already at work in the rose garden. A tall man with broad shoulders moving slowly along the canes, and a small girl in an oversized blue jacket kneeling beside him, helping him gather the cut stems into a wicker basket. Sterling watched them for a long time. He watched the way Hollis would now and then put a hand on his daughter's head lightly, the way men with very few words did when they wanted to say a great deal. He watched the way Breyer would now and then stop, sit back on her heels, and look up at her father the way children look up at the one person in the world who has never lied to them. He understood watching them that everything he had built, the firm, the house, the portfolio, the reputation, none of it had ever been the point. The point was this: a man and a child working together in a garden in the early gray light. A man with calloused hands telling a child without words that she was not alone. That was the thing that had been missing from his own life for a very long time. That was the thing his wife had perhaps stopped believing she would ever have with him. That was the thing perhaps that had begun the long quiet erosion that had ended in a forged signature and a recorded voice in a rented warehouse in Saugus. Sterling was not going to forgive what Adelaide had done, but he understood standing at his window in the early gray light that he had also failed her. He had failed her in small, daily, inattentive ways. He had not deserved to be killed for it, but he had perhaps deserved to be left. The difference between being left and being killed was a child in an oversized blue jacket. He pressed his hand flat against the cold glass. Then he turned away from the window. He had a lot to do. He had a wife to keep believing in her plan. He had a man named Reed Calloway to find. He had a housekeeper named Imogen to gently, carefully draw out. He had a substitute driver named Carl to identify. He had a recording of forged signature, a license plate, and a witness who was 10 years old and braver than most grown men. He had a warehouse in Saugus to learn the floor plan of. He had a trap to set. And he had somewhere deep beneath all of it a quiet sharpening promise to himself. Whatever happened in the days to come when this was over, whatever was left of his life, the small girl who had crossed his driveway at 6:53 on a Tuesday morning and saved him from his own car would never know another day of fear in his garden again. That was a vow. It was the truest vow Sterling Whitfield had made in 15 years. And as the first thin, clear light of morning rose over Brookline, he allowed himself for the first time since Breyer Holloway had taken his hand to feel something other than shock. He allowed himself to feel ready. The notebook was the thing that changed everything. Breyer had left it on the stone wall near the rose garden the evening before, tucked beneath an empty terracotta pot to keep it from the wind. When she came out to retrieve it the following morning, 2 pages near the middle had been disturbed. She knew immediately. She kept each page at a particular angle against the spiral, binding a habit she had developed without realizing it, an unconscious system that now served her the way a tripwire serves a soldier. The pages had been touched. More than touched. The page she had used to sketch Reed Calloway's face, the careful study she had made from memory 3 days after first seeing him come through the front gate in his green Audi, was gone. Torn out, not ripped quickly, carefully removed close to the binding, the way someone removes a page when they do not want the removal to be noticed. Briar stood at the stone wall and looked at the empty space where the page had been. She felt something cold move through her that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but something in between, the feeling of understanding that the danger was closer than she had thought and that it had already noticed her. She did not run to Sterling. She walked. She walked to the kitchen garden, picked up the small broom her father had cut down to her height, and began to sweep the greenhouse floor with the ordinary patience of a child doing ordinary chores. She waited for 15 minutes. Then she walked to the back door of the main house and knocked twice the way she always knocked when she was bringing herbs from the garden. Imogen Fairbank opened the door. Imogen looked at her with eyes that moved quickly across her face and then away, the eyes of a woman carrying something heavy and trying very hard not to let it show. "Is Mr. Whitfield in his study?" Briar asked. "He's in the garden, far side near the boxwood." "Thank you." Briar found Sterling standing at the far end of the property near the old iron fence, looking at nothing in particular, with the focused inward expression of a man running calculations that had nothing to do with money. "Someone took a page from my notebook," she said quietly when she reached him. He turned. She told him about the tripwire system, the particular angle, the torn edge near the binding. He listened without interrupting. "Which page?" he said when she finished. "The drawing of the man, the one I did from memory. His face warm." Sterling was very still. "Who has access to the stone wall area at night?" "Anyone in the house. The garden isn't locked after dark. The outdoor lights go to motion sensors at 10. Someone who knew the pattern could cross from the side terrace without triggering them." He looked at her. He had built firms. He had negotiated across tables from people who had entire teams dedicated to concealment and misdirection. He had been lied to by experts. He had never in his professional life encountered a more methodical mind than the one housed inside the 10-year-old girl standing in front of him in rubber boots. "Briar." "Yes, sir." "Do you know who it was?" She thought for a moment. "I don't know for certain," she said. "But I know who was awake. I heard footsteps in the hall past midnight. They went toward the back stairs. And this morning when Imogen opened the kitchen door, she looked at my face before she looked at my hands. She usually looks at my hands first to see what I'm carrying from the garden." Sterling absorbed that. "She looked at your face to see if you knew," he said. "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Stay in the greenhouse this afternoon," he said. "Work on the basil trays with your father. Don't go near the stone wall. Don't look like you've noticed anything." "Yes, sir." "And Briar." "Yes, sir." "Well done." She turned and walked back toward the greenhouse without looking behind her. Sterling watched her go. Then he took out his phone and called Prescott. "The housekeeper took a page from the child's notebook," he said when Prescott answered. "A drawing of Reed Calloway. We need to move." 3 days before the trap was set, Prescott Vaughn sat across from Detective Donovan Kerrigan in a back booth at a coffee shop on Beacon Street. It was a place with bad lighting and good coffee, the kind of place where nobody looked at anybody else. Kerrigan was a compact, careful man in his early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stallness of someone who had spent 30 years learning how to wait. He listened to everything Prescott told him without interrupting once. When Prescott finished, Kerrigan turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "You have a 10-year-old witness," he said. "I have 3 recordings, a forged insurance document, a substitute vehicle with a false plate, and a 10-year-old witness who also identified that someone in the house removed a drawing she made of the primary suspect." The recordings will matter. The document will matter. Oh, matter. The witness will matter more than either of them. I know. Juries love children who tell the truth. Juries love children who tell the truth and are not dramatic about it. She is not dramatic about anything. Kerrigan nodded slowly. Tell me about Reed Calloway. Prescott slid a thin folder across the table. Kerrigan opened it without haste. He read for a long time. His face did not change, but at a certain page, something in his eyes shifted slightly. Hartford, he said. Yes. I know this case, the Mallory case. Patricia Mallory, wife of Gordon Mallory, found at the bottom of the stairs in their Avon home. Ruled accidental. Her sister never believed it. She hired a private investigator for 3 years, couldn't get past the wall of Calloway's lawyers. Calloway was in significant debt at the time. The Mallorys had a life insurance policy of $8 million. Gordon Mallory was the beneficiary, not Patricia. The plan fell apart when Mallory refused to pay Calloway after the fact and moved to Costa Rica. So Calloway worked for Mallory. He did that time. This time he appears to be the co-architect with Mrs. Whitfield. Yes, she provided the access, the schedule, the signatures. He provided the operational knowledge. She believes she is the architect. She is not aware that he has done this before. Kerrigan turned another page. I can get a warrant for his phone records. The insurance amendment is enough for a judge I trust. I need the original recordings on a device my tech team can certify. You'll have them. The housekeeper, Fairbank. She took the page from the notebook. She is afraid and she is compromised. Her brother requires expensive surgery. Mrs. Whitfield arranged partial payment. We believe we can turn her. I'll want to talk to her before Monday. Arranged. And the father, Holloway. Sterling is telling him today. He should have been told days ago, but the child asked Sterling to wait until there was a plan. She was afraid her father would take her away from the property before anything could be done. Kerrigan looked up at that. The child asked Sterling to wait. Yes. How old did you say she was? 10. He closed the folder. He looked out at the street beyond the smeared window of the coffee shop, at the October leaves catching the pale sun on Beacon Street. When he turned back, his expression had settled into something that was almost but not quite admiration. I want an undercover officer positioned in the garden on Monday morning, Kerrigan said. Someone who can watch the child while the vehicle is in transit. And I want a second officer embedded with Calloway's team before Monday. I've had a source working the Charlestown connection for 6 weeks. One of Calloway's hired men has a record and a debt to the department. He'll cooperate. You've been building this from another angle. We've been building the Hartford case for 2 years. When your call came in last week and the name Calloway appeared, it connected. We were already watching him. Prescott was quiet for a moment. Then we have more than I thought. Considerably more, Kerrigan said. Here is how we do it. Sterling told Hollis Holloway that afternoon. He found the man in the carriage house sharpening a pair of hedge shears on a whetstone, working with the slow, methodical patience of someone who believed that a tool well cared for was a tool that never failed you. Sterling came in and closed the carriage house door behind him. Hollis looked up. He looked at Sterling's face. He set the shears down. Sterling told him everything beginning with Briar the Chrysanthemums and ending with the plan for the following Monday morning. He spoke quietly and without pausing. When he finished, the carriage house was completely silent except for the faint sound of wind along the roofline. Hollis Holloway sat on the wooden workbench with both hands on his knees. He looked at the ground for a long time. Then he looked up. My daughter has known this for a month, he said. His voice was very controlled. She carried this alone for a month. She was protecting you, Sterling said. She did not want you to lose your work. I would have lost every job I ever had to keep her safe. She knew that. That's why she didn't tell you. Hollis looked back at the ground. When this is over, he said finally, I'm going to figure out how to thank a 10-year-old girl for understanding the things I should have protected her from needing to understand. She did not need protecting, Sterling said. She needed trusting. You did that right. Hollis was quiet again. Will she have to testify? Kerrigan says there is enough without putting her in front of a jury, but her recordings will be entered as evidence. Her name will be part of the record, and they cannot reach her. Not while I am alive. Hollis looked at him steadily. Mr. Whitfield? Sterling, please. Sterling. He said the name like he was trying it out. I want to be in the garden Monday morning. When it happens. I want to be where I can see her. You will be. Kerrigan's people will be positioned in the garden and along the service road. You will be within 30 feet of her the entire time. Hollis nodded. She is everything I have left, he said quietly. It was not a dramatic statement. It was simply true. I know, Sterling said. I will not let anything happen to her. The two men stood in the carriage house in the late afternoon light that came through the dirty window and long dusty bars. Outside, they could hear Briar singing something softly to herself near the greenhouse. A small, absent sound, a child's sound. Hollis reached down and picked up the head shears. He ran the stone along the blade once more slowly. Monday, he said. Monday. The days between the carriage house conversation and Monday morning moved the way time moves when something important is coming. Slowly when you looked at them directly, and then suddenly gone when you were not looking. On Friday, Prescott met with Imogen Fairbank in the carriage house, while Hollis kept watch at the garden gate. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Imogen sat very straight on the wooden stool and answered everything Prescott asked her with the compressed precision of a woman who had been rehearsing the truth in her own head for weeks and was relieved finally to say it aloud. She had not taken the notebook page herself. She had told Adelaide that Briar kept a drawing notebook. She had described where Briar left it. She had done it because Adelaide had told her she needed to know whether the child was paying attention. She had done it because her brother's name was on a surgery waiting list, and the surgery cost more than she earned in 3 years. She had done it because a frightened person given a reason and a small amount of money and the assurance that no one would be permanently hurt could convince themselves that what they were doing was not what it was. She wept once briefly and then stopped and wiped her face with the hem of her apron. I knew it was wrong from the first week, she said. I knew it the way you know a tooth is going to need pulling before the pain is bad enough to go to the dentist. Prescott looked at her over his notebook. On Monday, he said, you will do nothing different from your normal routine. You will serve breakfast. You will manage the house. If Mrs. Whitfield asks about the gate codes or the garden or the child, you will tell her what she expects to hear. And after Monday, you will be asked to give a full statement. What you tell us will determine what happens to you. The more truthful you are, the better your position. She nodded. My brother, she said quietly. Sterling Whitfield has arranged for your brother's surgery to be funded through the Whitfield Family Foundation. That is done regardless of what happens Monday. It is not a payment for your cooperation. It is a decision Sterling made because he is not a man who punishes the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. Imogen put both hands over her face for a moment. Then she put them back in her lap. All right, she said. On Saturday, Sterling and Prescott walked the route the decoy vehicle would take, driving slowly through the industrial area of Everett where the warehouse sat. The building was exactly as Briar's recording had described. Low, long, corrugated metal siding, chain-link fence with new padlocks. No neighboring buildings with sightlines to the entrance. A wide steel gate that had recently been fitted with a motorized opener. Someone had prepared this place carefully. Sterling stood outside the fence and looked at it for a long time. He used a similar location in Hartford, Kerrigan said from beside him. Remote, industrial, private ownership routed through 2 shell companies. He's done this before, Sterling said. Not just Hartford. This is not improvised. He has a system. Our financial forensics team found 3 other transactions that fit the pattern going back 12 years. Different states, different victims, None of them resulted in charges. In two of the cases, the spouse was convicted of unrelated crimes years later and never connected Calloway. In the third case, the victim survived and could never prove anything. Sterling looked at the gate. He thought about a man who had made a career of disappearing other people. He thought about Adelaide, who had reached back 25 years to a college boyfriend and found, instead of a lost love, a professional predator who had seen in her loneliness and her grievance exactly the raw material he needed. He thought about what it meant that she had not known. He thought about what it meant that, knowing or not, she had still made the choices she had made. He will expect the car to enter the property, Kerrigan said. He will be waiting inside. When the car doesn't enter, he will call Calloway. By that point, Calloway will already be in custody. And the third man, the one you placed. Officer Trevino has been inside Calloway's operation for 6 weeks. He was brought in through the Charlestown connection as muscle for hire. Calloway trusts him because Calloway was given reason to trust him. When the moment comes, Trevino will secure the situation from inside. The driver, Briggs. Carl Briggs will have options presented to him during the ride. We expect him to accept them. And if he doesn't, then the vehicles close in and the options become fewer. Either way, the car does not enter that gate. Sterling turned away from the fence. He walked back to the car. He sat in the passenger seat and looked at the gray October sky over the harbor. He thought about a yellow legal pad, a list of names, a 10-year-old girl with a lock on a wooden box and a key on a string around her neck. He thought about what she had said sitting on the stone wall the evening before. My mom said women who pay attention are the ones who change things. Her mother had been right. Her mother had raised a daughter who had, at the age of 10, with no training, no authority, and no resource beyond patience. And a borrowed phone built a stronger case against two sophisticated criminals than a decade of professional investigation had managed. He thought about what kind of world produced a child like that. He thought about what kind of world he wanted to build now that he had been given the chance to keep living in it. On Sunday evening, Sterling came out to the stone wall near the rose garden as the last of the daylight left the sky. Briar was there, as she often was in the early evenings, her notebook open on her knees. She had been drawing the greenhouse again. She drew it often now. Sterling thought perhaps it had become for her a way of making sense of something that had no comfortable shape. He sat beside her on the wall. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rose garden was quiet in the way that gardens become quiet in October, when the last of the season is settling in, and the earth begins to prepare itself for something cold. The air smelled of turned soil and leaves and the faint ghost of what the roses had been in summer. "Are you afraid?" Sterling asked. Briar thought about this in her careful way. "Yes," she said, "but my dad says fear is just your body reminding you that something matters." He's right about that. He learned a lot of it from being scared, she said. In the Marines. He told me once that the bravest men he knew were almost always afraid. They just didn't stop moving. Sterling looked at the greenhouse. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I am going to walk out the front door with my briefcase just like I always do. I am going to get into the car. I am going to ride to wherever they take me, and the police will be there, and it will be over. And Mrs. Whitfield, Detective Kerrigan's team will be watching the house. If she tries to leave, they will stop her." Briar was quiet. "What happens to Imogen?" she asked. "She has cooperated with Prescott. She will testify. In exchange, the charges against her will be reduced. She is not a bad woman. She is a frightened woman who made a choice she cannot unmake. Because of her brother." "Yes. My mom was sick too," Briar said, "before she died. My dad spent everything we had. He took a second job. He worked nights." She paused. "He never asked anyone else to pay for it." Sterling did not answer that. He did not think she needed him to. "I know that Imogen did something wrong," Briar said after a moment, "but I feel sorry for her too. That is a very generous thing to feel. My mom said you can think someone is wrong and still feel sorry for them at the same time. She said that's what grown-up feelings are. Two things at once. Sterling looked at this small girl on the stone wall with her notebook and her watering can and her borrowed phone with the scratched orange case and her dead mother's voice living inside her like a compass. Your mother was extraordinary, he said. I know, said Briar. I'm going to be like her. You already are. She thought about that. Can I tell you something, she asked. Always. I'm not just scared of the car tomorrow. I'm scared of what happens after. Everything changing. The house, my dad's job, where we go. Your father will not lose his position here. I want to be very clear about that. If anything after tomorrow, this place becomes more yours than it has ever been. You say that now. I say it now because I mean it now, and I will mean it in a month and in a year. Some things, Briar, I know with certainty. The way I know certain numbers, certain outcomes, certain truths. I know this. She looked at him. Okay, she said. Okay, okay, I believe you. It was the most straightforward vote of confidence he had received in years. They sat together on the stone wall until the sky went fully dark and the first stars appeared over the elm trees. Then Hollis called from the cottage, and Briar slid off the wall, picked up her notebook, and walked toward her father's voice without looking back. Just before she reached the cottage door, she stopped. She turned. Mr. Whitfield. Yes. Get home safe tomorrow. He looked at her across the dark garden. I intend to, he said. Monday morning came in cold and clear. The frost had settled overnight on the grass, turning the lawn silver in the early light. Sterling woke at 5, dressed in the dark, and went down to the kitchen alone. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and drank it slowly, looking out at the garden. From where he stood, he could see the faint glow of the light in the Holloway cottage. Hollis was already up. Sterling set down his cup. He went to his study and took the yellow legal pad from the desk drawer. He read the list he had written 3 days ago. Then he tore the page into small pieces and dropped them in the fireplace and lit them with a match. He watched them burn. When the ash was cold, he swept it away. He picked up the envelope addressed to Prescott. He unlocked the safe and put it inside. He locked the safe again. He straightened his tie in the small mirror behind the study door. He picked up his briefcase. At 6:30, Adelaide came downstairs in a cream robe, her hair loose, looking, as she always looked in the early morning, effortlessly composed, as if composure were something she could put on in the dark. She stopped when she saw him in the kitchen dressed and ready. Early, she said, rebooked the morning flight. Have to catch it this time. She came to him. She poured herself coffee. She handed him the travel mug from the shelf above the stove. You forgot this last time. I did. She filled it for him and screwed the lid on. She handed it over. Thank you, he said. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the kitchen. The light was soft. The house was quiet. If you had not known anything, if you had simply walked in off the street and seen them, you would have seen a couple of a certain age moving through the familiar choreography of a weekday morning. The coffee handed over. The briefcase by the door. The small domestic patterns worn smooth by years of repetition. Sterling looked at her. She looked back. He wondered briefly if she felt anything in this moment. If there was some thread of the woman from the Newberry Street restaurant still alive somewhere behind those composed, watchful eyes. He decided it did not matter. I'll call when I land, he said. Safe travels, she said, and she smiled. He walked out the front door. The morning was sharp and clean. His breath came in small clouds. The frost on the grass caught the early sun and glittered. The driveway curved away toward the gate, and beyond the gate the black sedan was waiting. Briar was at the side of the garden, crouched over the chrysanthemums with the green watering can, her chestnut braid bright in the morning light. She did not look at him. Nearby, against the carriage house wall, a man in work clothes was stacking clay pots methodically. He was one of Kerrigan's officers positioned there at first light, and he had not looked up once from his work. Sterling walked down the front steps. He kept his pace even. He did not hesitate. He kept his eyes ahead, not on the car, not on the gate, just on the middle distance, the way a man walks when he is merely late. The driver got out. He opened the rear passenger door with his left hand. Sterling got in. The door closed. The car pulled forward. Inside the car, Sterling sat back against the seat and looked straight ahead. The driver's name Kerrigan had confirmed was Carl Briggs, former commercial driver 3DU. Is expunged significant gambling debts, no criminal record otherwise. A man who needed money badly enough to do something he could not have imagined himself doing 2 years ago. He drove carefully, signaled at every turn, kept to the speed limit. The ride was for the first 12 minutes completely normal. They took the road out of Brookline toward the expressway. Sterling opened his briefcase. He took out a folder. He stared at the contents without reading them. Then the car did not take the exit for Logan Airport. It continued straight. Sterling kept looking at the folder. He said nothing. Carl Briggs drove north away from the city center into the tangle of industrial roads that ran between the old textile districts and the harbor. The buildings became lower, longer, more widely spaced. The streets became quieter. The sidewalks disappeared. Chain-link fences lined either side. Gravel lots and loading docks and the rusted skeletons of loading cranes stood in the thin morning light. Sterling put the folder back in his briefcase. He clicked it shut. He looked out the window. "This isn't the airport road," he said. His voice was calm, conversational. Carl did not answer. "Carl," Sterling said. The driver's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "There's traffic on the expressway," he said. His voice was flat, over-rehearsed. "This route comes out further north." "I've taken the road to Logan for 8 years," Sterling said. "There is no alternate that comes out further north." Carl said nothing. They drove another 3 minutes. Then Sterling spoke again, not loudly, not angrily. "They paid you in cash," he said. "You needed it badly enough that you told yourself it wasn't really going to hurt anyone. Just a few days. Just until the arrangements were sorted. You told yourself that." Carl's jaw was tight. "They lied to you," Sterling said. "People who plan what they plan never leave the man who drove the car with enough money and freedom to talk about it. You know that. You've known it since you started driving." The car slowed slightly as they approached a long, low building set back from the road behind a corrugated metal fence. A wide gate of rusted steel stood at the entrance to the property. The gate was secured with a heavy chain, but even from the car, Sterling could see the chain was new. Recently bought. Someone had planned for this. Carl reached toward the dashboard. "Before you open that gate," Sterling said, "I want you to think carefully about what happens on the other side of it." Carl stopped. His hand hovered. "The people inside that property," Sterling said, "are not going to protect you. When this is over, you become a problem. Problems get solved." Carl's breathing was audible now. "On the other hand," Sterling said, "the 2 unmarked vehicles that have been following us since Brookline and the one waiting at the end of this road are your other option." Carl looked in the rearview mirror. Down the road, a dark vehicle was visible, moving slowly toward them. In the side mirror, another one was coming from behind. "You have about 90 seconds," Sterling said, "to make the most important decision of your life." Carl Briggs sat in the driver's seat of a car he had rented, with money he should never have taken in front of a gate he should never have approached, and he was very still. Sterling waited. The sound of the approaching vehicles grew. The gravel ticked beneath the tires. The wind off the harbor pushed through the chain link with a low, steady whistle. Then Carl Briggs put the car in park. He placed both hands on the dashboard. He said in a voice that had gone very small, "I didn't know they were going to hurt him. They said just a few days. They said he would be scared but fine." "I know," Sterling said. "I need to talk to someone." "Yes," Sterling said. "You do." The 2 vehicles pulled up on either side. Doors open. Detective Kerrigan came to the driver's window, badge in hand. He looked in at Sterling. "Mr. Whitfield." "Detective?" Are you all right? Yes. Kerrigan looked at Carl Briggs, both hands still on the dashboard. Sir, I'd like you to step out of the vehicle. Carl stepped out. Sterling sat in the back of the car for one more moment. He looked at the corrugated metal fence. He looked at the new chain on the old gate. He thought about the warehouse beyond it. He thought about a man kept in a dark room without his phone, without food, until he was too weak to argue with anything anyone told him. He thought about a 10-year-old girl with an orange-cased phone and a wooden box with a lock and a key on a string around her neck. He got out of the car. He stood on the gravel in the cold morning air and breathed. A sharp sound from inside the fence. Shouting. The sound of running feet on concrete. Then silence followed by a calm, level voice saying words Sterling could not quite make out. Kerrigan's radio crackled. He listened. He looked at Sterling. Calloway is in custody, he said. Officer Trevino secured him from inside when the car didn't appear. He did not resist. The third man. Also in custody, 3 men in total, all secured. Sterling nodded. He took his phone from his breast pocket and called Prescott. It's done, he said. I'm in Everett. Send the second team to the house. At the Whitfield estate on Chestnut Hill Avenue, Adelaide Whitfield had been composed for exactly 47 minutes after the car left the driveway. Then her phone buzzed with a message from a number registered to a burner device that Kerrigan's team had been tracking for 6 days. The message said, "Problem, car stopped." Adelaide read it twice. She put the phone face down on the kitchen table. She was still for a moment. Then she walked to the hallway closet. She pulled from the back of it a small rolling bag she had packed in stages over the past 2 weeks, adding 1 or 2 items at a time so that nothing would look sudden. The bag was dark green, the kind that fit in an overhead compartment, the kind that did not draw attention. She carried it to the kitchen. She picked up a small leather wallet from the back of the highest cabinet shelf behind the old cookbooks that no one ever opened. Inside the wallet was a passport. The name on the passport was not Adelaide Whitfield. She put the wallet in the inner pocket of her coat. She had not told Reed about the passport. She had not told Tad about the separate account she had been building for 3 years in an institution he had no knowledge of. She had not told him about the safety deposit box on Newberry Street or the arrangements she had made with a private attorney in Vermont who specialized in asset protection. She had loved Reed once a long time ago, in the careless way of someone very young who does not yet know that carelessness has consequences. She had not loved him again when he came back. She had used him the way he had intended to use her, and she had been careful from the beginning to ensure that when the plan concluded, she would not need to share anything with anyone, including Reed. She put the coat on. She picked up the rolling bag. She walked to the door to the garage. She stopped. The door was not locked. She pushed it open and stepped into the garage. The garage was cool and dim. 3 vehicles sat in their spaces. Her own cream-colored Volvo, Sterling's second car, and the old Range Rover they used for the house. Standing in front of her Volvo was a small girl in an oversized blue jacket. Briar Holloway stood very still with both hands at her sides. Her chestnut braid was coming slightly loose. Her boots had mud on them from the frost-softened lawn she had just crossed. She looked up at Adelaide Whitfield with the steady, unblinking gaze of a child who has decided not to be afraid. Adelaide stared at her. Briar. Her voice was careful, controlled. What are you doing in here? Waiting, Briar said. This is not a place for you to be. Go back to your father. In a minute, Briar said. Adelaide looked at the rolling bag in her own hand. She looked at the child in front of her car. Move aside, please. No, ma'am, Briar said. Adelaide took a step forward. Briar took a step back, but only one step. Enough to stay between the woman and the car, not enough to give way. Briar, I need you to move. The button for the gate is on the wall, Briar said. I already pressed it. The gate is locked. It won't open from inside or outside without the code. I changed the code. Adelaide was very still. You changed the code. Yes, ma'am. My dad showed me the panel last year when he had to let a delivery truck in. I remembered the procedure. You can't change the code. You need the admin override. The admin override is the last four digits of the house phone number. It's written in my dad's maintenance manual. He keeps it in the carriage house. I read it last spring. Adelaide looked at the child. She looked at the locked garage door behind her leading back into the house. She looked at the closed bay door in front of the car leading to the driveway. She looked at the small green panel on the wall with the new code that a 10-year-old girl had keyed in while the frost was still on the lawn. Briar. Her voice had changed, softer now, almost gentle. You don't fully understand what is happening. Yes, ma'am, Briar said. I do. You only heard parts of things. Children do that. They hear pieces and they build stories. I recorded them, Briar said, 3 times. Mr. Whitfield has the phone. Detective Kerrigan has the recordings. The name Kerrigan landed in Adelaide's face like something cold. She looked for just a moment, not at the child in front of her, but at some interior calculation that had just come out wrong. She set the rolling bag down slowly. She thought about the passport in her coat. She thought about the account in Vermont. She thought about the 3-year plan she had built so carefully around a man she had never intended to keep. She thought about the fact that a 10-year-old girl had been listening since before the plan had fully formed. You are a child, she said. Yes, ma'am, Briar said. I know. For a moment, Adelaide Whitfield, who had gone to Smith College, who had run the public relations division of one of Boston's most prominent healthcare firms, who had chaired 3 charitable foundations and sat on 2 boards and could make a room of powerful adults listen to her with 6 sentences, stood in her own garage and was held in place by a 10-year-old in muddy boots. Then the door from the kitchen opened. Detective Kerrigan's partner, Officer Renata Bryce, stepped through it. Behind her 2 more officers. Adelaide looked at them. She looked at Briar. She looked at her own rolling bag on the floor. She looked at the inner pocket of her coat where the passport with the wrong name sat beside the address of a Vermont attorney who would not be receiving her call. She said nothing. Briar stepped aside. Officer Bryce came to Adelaide and spoke to her quietly, professionally, reading her rights in a calm, even voice. Adelaide listened. She did not look at the officers. She looked at the space in front of her, the middle distance, the same way Sterling had looked at it walking down his driveway that morning. When the handcuffs closed, Adelaide turned her head. She looked at Briar. Something moved across her face. What it was, Briar could not quite name. It was not fury. It was not grief. It was something stranger. It was the look of a woman who has just understood that the story she had been telling herself for a long time does not end the way she imagined. And underneath that look, barely visible, was something else. The faint, cold recognition that the plan she had built without Reed, the plan she had kept entirely to herself, had also come apart. That every contingency she had prepared had been made irrelevant by a child she had dismissed as a gardener's daughter. You should have stayed out of it, Adelaide said quietly. You're a child. This had nothing to do with you. Briar stood very straight. My mom told me, she said, that if you see something wrong and you stay quiet, then a little bit of the wrong belongs to you. Adelaide held her gaze for one more moment. Then she looked away. Officer Bryce led her through the kitchen door and out of the house. Briar stood alone in the garage for a moment. She could feel her legs shaking. She had not noticed them shaking until now. She pressed her hands against her thighs and breathed slowly the way her dad had taught her, in through the nose, 4 counts out through the mouth. The rolling bag sat on the floor next to the cream-colored Volvo. Briar did not look at it. She walked to the small side door of the garage and stepped out into the October morning. The frost had nearly melted now. The lawn was damp and bright. The elm trees were turning. The roses along the back garden wall had gone to rose hip, the small red fruits catching the light in dozens of places. Hollis Holloway was coming across the lawn at a near run. He stopped when he saw her. He looked her over the way a father looks at a child when he has been afraid, checking with his eyes that everything is where it should be. Briar. I'm okay, Dad. He reached her. He put both hands on her shoulders. He crouched to her level and looked at her face. Are you sure? Yes, she paused. My legs were shaking. That's all right. You said fear is just your body reminding you that something matters. Yes, something mattered. He pulled her into his arms. He held her tightly the way men hold their children when they have come very close to understanding how fragile everything is. Briar held on. After a moment, she felt him exhale slowly, a long breath he had perhaps been holding since the morning she had told him everything. Over his shoulder, she could see the greenhouse. The glass walls caught the October sun and made the inside glow soft green and gold. She watched it for a moment, then she closed her eyes. Sterling Whitfield returned to the house at noon. He came through the front door and stood in the foyer for a long moment. The grandfather clock ticked. The house was very quiet. Imogen Fairbank was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea in the particular stillness of someone who has been sitting with themselves for a long time. She stood when he came in. Her face was gray. Mr. Whitfield? Sit down, Imogen. She sat. He poured himself a glass of water. He leaned against the counter. Your brother, he said. What does the procedure cost? She looked at him. Sterling, Prescott said from the doorway, a note of warning in his voice. I know what I'm doing, Prescott. He did not look away from Imogen. What does it head in? She told him in a very small voice. He nodded. I'll have Prescott arrange it through the foundation. You will not mention this to anyone. You will testify fully, and honestly. That is the only condition. Imogen put her hand over her mouth. Mr. Whitfield, she began. You made a terrible choice, he said. You made it for a reason that was not entirely selfish, which does not excuse it, but explains it. I am not in the business of explaining things to a jury. I am in the business of living in this house after all of this is over. I would prefer to do that without carrying more grief than I already carry. Imogen nodded. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. Go home and call your brother. She left. Prescott watched him. That was generous, he said. It was practical, Sterling said. A frightened witness is an unreliable one. Prescott smiled just slightly. Whatever you say. Sterling did not smile. Is she booked? He asked. Adelaide was processed an hour ago. Reed Calloway was picked up at the Everett property when Officer Trevino secured the scene. He did not resist. He looked by all accounts like a man who had been expecting a knock at his door for quite some time. The Hartford District Attorney's Office was notified this morning. They are reviewing their case file. Good. There was something else, Prescott said carefully. When they processed Adelaide's coat, they found a passport in a name that wasn't hers. And phone records show she'd been in contact with a private attorney in Vermont, someone who specializes in offshore asset protection. Sterling was quiet. She wasn't planning to share the money with Reed, Prescott said. No, Sterling said. She wasn't. She was going to take it and disappear. Yes. Sterling looked out of the kitchen window at the garden, at the greenhouse glowing softly in the noon light, at Hollis and Briar moving among the beds together in the October sun. She didn't trust him any more than he trusted her, Sterling said. Apparently not. Two people who were each planning to betray the other, and neither of them planned for a 10-year-old girl. Prescott was quiet for a moment. No, he said. Neither of them did. Sterling set down his glass. When can I see her? He asked. Prescott understood what he meant. Kerrigan can arrange a glass partition visit today or tomorrow. But Sterling, you don't have to. I know. Some men in your position choose not to. It doesn't serve the case either way. It serves me, Sterling said. I need to see her face once more before I decide who she was. He went that afternoon. The visitation room at the Suffolk County Detention Center was a plain fluorescent room with a row of booths divided by thick safety glass. Adelaide was already seated when he came in. She was wearing the clothes she had been arrested in. Her hair was tied back. She looked smaller somehow, as people often do when the architecture of their daily life has been removed. Sterling sat down. He picked up the handset. She picked up hers. They looked at each other through the glass. He said nothing. She said finally, "I did not think it would come to this." "How did you think it would come?" "I thought you would simply be calm. I thought it would be quiet. I thought the worst of it would be the waiting." "For the money," she flinched, only slightly. "For the end of something that had already ended," she said. "The money was Reed's idea. I knew I couldn't leave with nothing. My name is on nothing, Sterling. 15 years of my life, and my name is on nothing. You could have left. I would have been generous. Your lawyers would have made sure generous lasted exactly as long as your patience did." He did not argue with that. "You chose to believe in a man who had done this before," he said. "A man who killed a woman in Hartford and was never charged. Did you know that?" Something shifted in her face, very slightly. "No," she said. "I didn't know that. His name appears in a closed investigation. The wife of a man he worked for. She fell downstairs. He arranged the insurance and was supposed to be paid by her husband. Her husband took the money and disappeared to Costa Rica. Reed never saw a cent." Adelaide was very still. "You were his second attempt," Sterling said. "You were not the love of his life. You were a corrected mistake." She looked down at the counter. He did not say what he knew about the Vermont attorney or the passport or the separate account. He did not say it because Kerrigan had asked him not to, because it was evidence, and because saying it would only tell her what the prosecution already had. But he looked at her through the glass, and he understood something that he had not understood that morning. She had been planning to betray Reed the same way Reed had been planning to use her. They had found each other across 25 years of separate roads and had arrived at the same destination by completely different routes. Two people who thought they were conspiring together and were each privately conspiring alone. It was almost elegant in its terrible way. "I'm telling you about Hartford," Sterling said, "not to be cruel. I'm telling you because in the months ahead, when your attorneys try to build a story about a lonely woman and a lost love, Kerrigan's team will lay out the Hartford evidence in detail, and the jury will see not a love story, but a pattern." She did not look up. "Adelaide," she looked. "I want to ask you one thing, just one, and I want you to answer it honestly because it is the last honest conversation we are ever going to have." She waited. "Was there a moment," he said, "in the past year and a half when you could have stopped it and chose not to?" She was quiet for a long time. "Yes," she said finally. "There were several." He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. He stood. She watched him. "Sterling." He paused. "I did love you once," she said. "For a long time I loved you." He looked at her through the glass, at the woman who had handed him a travel mug that morning, at the woman in the yellow dress on Newbury Street, at the woman at his mother's grave, at the woman whose voice had said 15 years with a cold he had never heard in her before. "I know," he said. "That makes it harder, not easier." He set the handset down. He walked out. He did not look back. Reed Calloway was arraigned at Suffolk Superior Court 3 days after his arrest. He was held without bail on the strength of Officer Trevino's testimony and the recordings Breyer had made. He did not speak to reporters. He walked into the courthouse with the contained, careful stillness of a man who has been in difficult rooms before and knows that the most dangerous thing you can do in a difficult room is let anyone see you think. He looked, Sterling was told later by Prescott, like a man who had already begun calculating his next move. There was no next move available to him. The Hartford District Attorney had reopened the Mallory case within 48 hours of his arrest. The evidence gathered in Massachusetts, combined with financial records the Connecticut team had been assembling for 2 years, built a case that his lawyers would spend 3 years trying to dismantle and fail. At his sentencing, the Mallory family was present. Patricia Mallory's sister, a woman in her 60s who had hired 3 private investigators and never given up, sat in the front row and did not look away from Reed Calloway's face once during the entire proceeding. Sterling was told about this later. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about what it meant to wait that long for the truth to arrive. He thought about how many people in how many courtrooms and living rooms and quiet moments of private grief had spent years waiting for something that finally came because a 10-year-old girl in Brookline had decided not to stay quiet. 4 months after the arrest, the courtroom on Pemberton Square was quiet and warm. The jury had been out for 11 hours. When they came back in, the forewoman stood with the same expression every forewoman wears. When the news is the only news it could be, certain, heavy, and final. Reed Calloway was convicted on all counts. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud. The Hartford verdict came 6 months later. Life without the possibility of parole, the judge said, and the Mallory family's sister pressed both hands flat against her thighs and nodded once the way a person nods when something long overdue has finally arrived. Adelaide Whitfield, née Stafford, 45, of Brookline, was convicted on 3 counts: conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice. The possession of a fraudulent passport and the discovered offshore account added additional charges that her attorneys had no satisfactory answer for. Her sentencing came 6 weeks after the verdict. 25 years, the judge, a white-haired man from Quincy who had seen many things in 30 years on the bench, did not deliver the sentence with drama. He delivered it the way all serious sentences should be delivered: quietly, clearly, as if it were simply what the truth weighed translated into time. Carl Briggs received 8 years with the possibility of parole in 5, in recognition of his cooperation and his having removed himself from the situation before any harm was done. Imogen Fairbank received a suspended sentence in 3 years of supervised probation. She testified for 11 hours over 2 days. She did not waver. Her brother's surgery had taken place 6 weeks before the trial at a facility in Boston arranged and funded quietly through the Whitfield Family Foundation. The surgery was successful. Her brother sent Sterling a handwritten letter that Sterling read once carefully and then placed in the small, fireproof box where he kept documents that mattered. On a Saturday morning in late November, 6 weeks after the verdict, Sterling Whitfield walked out of his house into the cold, clear air. The elm trees had lost their leaves. The rose garden was put to bed for winter, the canes cut back and mulched by Hollis the previous week. The greenhouse glowed softly in the pale sun, its glass walls beaded with morning condensation. Sterling walked across the frost-stiffened lawn toward the greenhouse. Hollis was repairing a section of wooden raised bed along the south wall, replacing a plank that had begun to rot at one end. He nodded when Sterling approached. "Morning," Sterling said. "Morning." They stood for a moment in the comfortable silence of men who no longer needed to explain themselves to each other. It was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled this property for years. That one had been the silence of people who lived parallel lives and called it peace. This one was something else, simpler, more honest. "How is she?" Sterling asked. "Good, better. She started a new notebook last week. She says she's going to draw every plant in the greenhouse by January. She'll manage it. She usually does." Sterling reached into the pocket of his overcoat. He took out a small key on a green ribbon. He held it in his palm for a moment, feeling the weight of it, which was negligible, and the weight of what it represented, which was not. "I'd like to give this to her," he said. "Is that all right?" Hollis looked at the key. He looked at Sterling. "You don't have to ask me," he said. "Yes, I do," Sterling said. "She's your daughter." Hollis was quiet for a moment. "I'll go get her." He set down his tools and walked toward the cottage. Sterling waited. He stood in front of the greenhouse with his hands in his pockets and looked at the glass walls, the soft green interior, the long wooden tables with their clay pots. He thought about what had happened inside those walls. He thought about a 10-year-old girl sitting by the rosemary all afternoon with a borrowed phone pretending to read a book. He thought about what kind of courage that required. Not the courage of action. That it was a different thing, its own kind of remarkable. But the courage of patience. The courage of deciding that the truth was worth waiting for and worth carrying alone and worth building a case around even when you were 10 years old and the adults around you were either in danger or in on it. He had spent 30 years being considered a man of extraordinary judgment. He understood now that judgment was not the same thing as wisdom, and that he had been confusing the two for a very long time. The cottage door opened. Briar Holloway stepped out. She was wearing the oversized blue jacket and the muddy boots and the chestnut braid that was coming slightly loose because some things do not change in 6 weeks or 6 years. She looked up at him with her dark, level eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Whitfield." "Good morning, Briar." He crouched down to her level as he had not done before and held out the key on the green ribbon. She looked at it. "The greenhouse," she said. "Yours," he said, "to grow whatever you want. Vegetables, flowers, whatever your father will teach you. Whatever you discover on your own." She looked at the key for a long moment. "Because of what happened in there?" she asked. "Because of what started in there," he said. "And because the place where you hear the truth ought to become a place where something good grows." She took the key carefully and held it in both hands. "I'll grow tomatoes first," she said. "My dad says tomatoes are the hardest and most honest thing in a garden." Sterling smiled. "That sounds about right." She looped the green ribbon over her head. The key settled against her collar next to the spot where for months a different key had hung. A wooden box, a small lock, a collection of truths that had kept a man alive. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. "Yes." "Are you going to be okay?" He looked at the greenhouse. He looked at the winter garden. He looked at the elm trees with their bare branches and the gray November sky above them, and the frost on the grass and along the fence near the carriage house. Hollis Holloway returning to his work with the slow, unhurried pace of a man who understood that good things required patience. "Yes," Sterling said. "I think I am going to be more than okay." She considered that. "Good," she said. "My mom would say that's what's supposed to happen. When you do the right thing, the right things come back." "Your mother said a great many things that were worth keeping," he said. "I know," said Briar. "That's why I kept them." She turned and walked into the greenhouse. Through the glass walls, Sterling watched her move between the long wooden tables, touching the edge of a clay pot here, brushing a leaf there, the key on the green ribbon swinging lightly at her collar. She stopped at the back corner near the potting bench, near the old brick wall, with the chipped corner brick. She stood there for a moment looking at it. Then she reached behind the brick. She took out the small memory card she had hidden there months ago, on a day when she had been 10 years old and more afraid than she had let anyone see. She held it in her palm and looked at it for a long moment. Then she walked to the potting bench and placed it carefully inside an empty clay pot. She would give it to Kerrigan on Monday. She had promised she would, and she kept her promises. But first she picked up a small trowel from the table. She began to work. Sterling stood outside the glass and watched until the cold drove him back toward the house. He was not a man given to ceremony. He was not a man who marked occasions with speeches or gestures or the kind of grand statements that look well on plaques. But walking back across the frost-stiffened lawn that morning with the key to his own greenhouse, given away to a child who had used that place to save his life, Sterling Whitfield felt something settle in him, something that had been loose and turning for a long time. He did not have a name for it. He thought perhaps it was what his mother had called when he was a boy, coming home to yourself. He had been away from himself for a long time. It was good to be back. In January, the first tomato seedlings appeared in the greenhouse, small and bright and improbably green against the winter light. Hollis and Briar checked on them every morning before school and every afternoon after. Briar kept a record of each one in a new notebook with a dark green cover. The notebook was nearly full by February. In March, the Briar Holloway Foundation was formally established under Massachusetts law with an initial endowment funded entirely by Sterling Whitfield. Its stated purpose was the provision of educational scholarships to children in working families in the greater Boston area, with particular preference given to children who had demonstrated courage in difficult circumstances. The Board of Trustees included Prescott Vaughn Hollis Holloway and Detective Donovan Kerrigan, who had retired from the Boston Police Department in February, and Hattie said more time for things that mattered. The first scholarship was awarded that spring. The recipient was a 12-year-old girl from Dorchester. She would go on to study environmental science at the University of Vermont. The second scholarship the following year went to a boy from Roxbury who wanted to be an attorney. Briar Holloway did not receive a scholarship from the foundation that bore her name. Sterling and Prescott had seen to her education separately, quietly, in a way that would not make her feel like a transaction. A trust in her name, enough for college, for graduate school, for whatever she decided to become in the years of her life still ahead. She did not find out about it until she was 16. When Hollis told her, she sat at the kitchen table in the cottage for a long moment looking at the small tomato plant she kept on the windowsill in a clay pot, the descendant of the first seedlings from that January. She turned the pot slowly in her hands. "He didn't have to do that," she said. "No," Hollis said. "He didn't." She turned the pot once more. "I'm going to pay it forward," she said. "Someday, when I can." "I know you will," Hollis said. He put his hand on the top of her head briefly, lightly. Outside the cottage window, the late afternoon light moved across the Whitfield garden, gold and long and unhurried, the way October light always moves in New England, as if it has learned something over many years about taking its time. The greenhouse stood at the center of it, green and glass and quietly glowing. The tomatoes were still growing. The truth had already been told. And a child who had been brave enough to speak was sitting at a kitchen table, turning a clay pot in her hands, thinking about what she wanted to become. That was more than enough. That was everything.